Well, hey, welcome. This is the Santander session. We're going to be covering for the next hour, really, the transformational journey that Santander's been on. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Matt Rickson. I'm Global AVP for our AWS specialists. Dennis?
I'm Dennis Schultz. I'm a distinguished technical architect, also on our team within Salesforce supporting our AWS partnership.
And I'm Graham Calder. I'm the CIO of Santander UK.
We are going to be talking about some public or some future capabilities. So make all your buying decisions based upon current product. So Graham, we've had a chance to spend some time together, and could you help us understand who Santander Bank UK is, and some of the challenges that you have?
Yeah, so Santander UK, we're headquartered in London. We are a retail bank within the ring-fence banking sector within the UK market. We are the third largest mortgage lender to consumers within the UK. We are the fifth largest commercial lender to consumers and businesses within the UK. And we are part of Grupo Santander, which is the fourth largest banking group in Europe.
That's great. You guys have become really the fabric of the UK and the whole banking environment. It's been pretty challenging with COVID and other changes. What are some of the people, process, and technology issues that you're faced at the bank today?
Yeah, well, the banking sector has undergone huge change over the last few years. Most people don't think about the role of their high street bank, but actually what we do is we connect the main arteries of commerce and finance with consumers and companies, and we allow the two to interact. But what that also means is that in times of stress, we also act as a shock absorber in the middle. So when you get things like COVID, and take an event like the first lockdown in the UK in early 2020, the UK economy was going into flatline. There was a real risk of everything collapsing. The role of the banks, Santander and our peer banks within the sector, was to move capital and money from where it was to where it was needed, whether that be through government loans or financial interventions from large markets. We had to move that cash very, very quickly, very seamlessly into people's bank accounts to keep them running. And that also meant things like suspending payments on loans, etc., all of which had to be done very, very quickly and done in a way that protected the integrity of the system overall. So not unsurprisingly, one of the things that we have to be very aware of as a bank is operational resilience. This is a big theme for the UK sector, as it is for banking everywhere. Operational resilience is non-negotiable because we have to be able to prove that we can be there in the most extreme circumstances, whether that be COVID, war in Europe, market collapse, for the UK stock markets, etc., all of which have happened in the last 3 years and used to be generational events. So there's an enormous pressure on the banking companies to be able to withstand those shocks, because we need to be able to withstand them to be able to service our customers in the right way. But the market overall is also changing. We've seen a very substantial move from traditional retail and online banking via contact centers to more mobile and online-centric channels. And that's also been accompanied by a big shift in the use of cash into electronic payments. So less than 15% of the transactions in the UK now actually involve cash. Most of it is some sort of electronic payment infrastructure. So that's been a huge shift for the banks to accommodate, and we've been part of that. But we also have to remember that in all the talk of digital and the talk of the shift to electronic cash, there are still people who use cash itself. They use the branch network, they use the contact center. So for Santander, it's very important for us to preserve the principle of making sure we're always there for our customers, wherever they need us, whenever they need us, and however they need us, which means that we operate across an omnichannel set of capabilities. And it's very important that we preserve all of that and make sure that our customers are able to engage with us whatever those their needs are, and make sure we keep all those channels open.
That sounds like quite a task ahead of you. So when, from an IT perspective, with all this change happening, you're moving to the public cloud, but what are some of the challenges or systems that you have in place today that are making it difficult to move forward?
Yeah, so in common with a lot of our peer banks, we have a long history of using technology, but also what that means is that you also build up a legacy over time. So many of our platforms are pre-digital age. They weren't really built for that type of environment, and yet we do a remarkable job of making them work in that environment, which is testament to the teams that sit around them and actually make these technologies work in a way. But it's not easy, and it's not always straightforward, particularly when you get these big shocks to the system. It means you have to kind of stop everything else you're doing and just focus on that one problem. So we have legacy technologies that were built for a different type of environment. But also as a CIO, you also have all of the other competing objectives. So we've got a very clear need from our market to be available to our customers wherever and whenever they need us, to be able to withstand those shocks. So you need to be absolutely operationally resilient. You need to be totally secure. We're a bank. It's not up for debate and discussion. But on top of that, you've also then got all those other competing intentions that you get as a CIO, and I'm sure this happens in every other company as well, where you have to go faster but be more stable. You have to be more cost efficient, but be able to support more products and more channels. So you've got this whole set of competing, often what appear to be contradictory requirements that are acting upon you as a CIO, not just in terms of what you need to do for your market and for your customers and your colleagues, but also the parameters that you need to operate in order to make sure that all the characteristics of your technology are supporting the broader business. So, the ability to reduce the cost of a transaction, but make that transaction more effective. So there's lots and lots of competing tensions.
So when you think about Salesforce and AWS coming together, what are some of the key tenets that you're looking for the team to drive?
Yeah, so number one, when you start to sort of look at where you spend your time as the internal IT team, you realize that actually you spend a heck of a lot of your time integrating. This is, you're effectively just an integrator and an operator of a lot of infrastructure and a lot of other people's stuff. So one of the things we're looking for is the ability to leverage the rich capabilities that are in both platforms, and that's been around for a number of years, and I've used them in a number of roles. But actually what's great is that what AWS and Salesforce have done now is take the friction out of that. So all of those integration points that we needed to establish between the two, all the work we still needed to do to bring these two great platforms together, most of that has now gone. And the value to us is huge, because what that does is it allows us to move to the value-enhancing piece and solving the business problem quicker than doing all the work on the plumbing. The plumbing is essential. It needs to work. It needs to be secure. It needs to be resilient. But ultimately, it's not what the customer and it's not what our business colleagues perceive. They just accept that as table stakes. So what we're able to do is remove that friction from the equation, and then we can get on to delivering value quicker.
Great. So for those of you who aren't aware, right, Salesforce and AWS have had a commitment for a number of years, or partnership. And it was in June of 21 where there's additional commitments commitments made around how we go to market. And Andy Jassy was the CEO of Amazon Web Services at the time and was really focused on improving that developer experience. Mark Benioff wanted to really improve the customer 360. So the investments that we've made are really in a couple of different sets of products. So if you look on the intelligent application side of things, we've been working in providing joint applications from taking Amazon Chime and making that part of Salesforce Health Cloud that allows us to really have a virtual doctor visit, right? Or with intelligent automation, leveraging TextTrack to manage through long-running automation projects. And probably most significantly is really the contact center transformation, where we've been taking Amazon Connect and make that part of Service Cloud, right? So now we start taking advantage of a lot of new capabilities that weren't there before. So I think from a coaching perspective, from the ability to monitor what the people are saying, and from a knowledge management perspective, there's a host of capabilities that you're using the best of both products. We also have been busy on the data and security side of stuff, right? So But with being able to take the friction out, as Graham is saying, but also be able to let developers develop in new ways, right? So leveraging low-code application development techniques and taking those programmers who are highly skilled to do some very specialized types of projects. So we've been working through this unified developer experience. We've been working through plumbing, if you will, to provide more pipelines of data directly into some of the AI tools and directly from the AWS repositories, as well as new ways and new integration patterns, whether we're virtualizing data, whether we're physically moving data or using an event-based architecture like EventBridge with Salesforce events. But most importantly, we're focused on the trust and building new ways to connect the two platforms. So Dennis, we've been out to a whole bunch of customers, and as you're kind of out listening, what are some of the things that you're hearing that are kind of repeatable types of solutions people are looking for?
Sure. First of all, show of hands, how many here are customers of Salesforce already today? So hopefully a lot of you are looking at this and saying, how can this add value to my enterprise, my work? So that's where we come in. So my team is a team of technical architects supporting Matt's team. We work side by side with our AWS solution architect counterparts to go into our mutual customers to find the most value we can out of their investments in both platforms, to leverage it both as efficiently as they possibly can. In general, I would say what we're seeing is our customers are using Salesforce as the pane of glass, the engagement layer. So this is used by sales, service, marketing, maybe even customers directly or retail consumers to engage with the platforms and the systems that our customers use. AWS is being leveraged then, kind of the muscle behind the glass, if you will. So the heavy data lifting, the horsepower behind the compute platforms, the analysis. So we're putting that back on the pane of glass for the users that really need it within Salesforce. Now there are a lot of places you can go with this. Our team's kind of broken those use cases down into these 5 buckets that you see on the screen, and these are a bit flexible. But on the far left end, simply getting the data that's in AWS, that valuable customer data, getting it out and in front of the users that need it in the Salesforce platform. That's kind of step one. And then we see customers that have taken that a step further, put that data into their marketing platform, so into Salesforce Marketing Cloud, be able to understand the customer better so they can put that customer on a journey where we can engage with the right customer at the right time with the right message. The third box here is what Matt was talking about over on the right side of his slide, these pre-integrated solutions that we've come to market with alongside AWS. So Service Cloud Voice, doing things like extracting text from images. Think of the healthcare industry, how much paper-based processes there still are in the healthcare industry, those and banking industry for that matter.
Yeah, we got a few.
So those documents arrive as maybe a fax or an image. We can pull data from those. This fourth box, the customer-driven innovation, to me, this is sort of that blank canvas. We could do about anything with this, right? This is going back to Matt's slide on the left-hand side, the unified developer experience, making it possible for developers on both platforms to leverage the services of each other to build really custom, bespoke applications that serve the need of that particular industry or that particular customer. And then finally, AI and ML. We know that AWS has a host of amazing tools around machine learning. Sometimes the data that you want to analyze for those models lives in Salesforce. So firstly, our customers want to be able to leverage that data that's captured around the customer that's in Salesforce into those models, make predictions, and then secondly, bring those predictions back into the Salesforce environment to be able to better serve their customers and make better judgments. So Graham, I'll turn it back to you. You started this journey with the Salesforce and AWS partnership in the middle box, the integrated offerings with Service Cloud Voice. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey there with the pilot program, how that went, and some of the results that you saw.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, just looking at this slide, but yeah, we very much started in the middle. Our contact center platform is one of our oldest platforms in the company. We've talked about some of our legacy. It's there today. We do an amazing job with it, actually. Again, the teams managed to get it to do things it was never designed for. But really, it needed to be replaced, and it was one of the sort of main focuses for the company to make sure that we had the right technology to take us to the next 20 years, and to make sure that we could sort of integrate that into all the different channels, do it in a seamless way, bridge all the various channels that we need to. And we liked Amazon Connect, but often one of the challenges you get with Amazon Connect is, okay, but how do you put it in front of an agent? How do you give it a front end that the agent can then interact with, rather than it just being a sort of raw telephony platform? And our timing was good, because we found ourselves in a situation where the partnership had got to a point of maturity where Salesforce Service Cloud with voice interconnect was a really viable solution for us. And we liked that approach. We liked the fact that we could take two very, very good, capable platforms that we knew we wanted to leverage on a wider basis, plug them together, that we'd get good surety of outcome, not to be underestimated in terms of the IT world, getting it right first time. And we were able to take the two. But what it was interesting was that it led us into a different set of conversations, because it led us into a lot of and conversations rather than or conversations. So if I do this, I can put a single pane of glass in front of my agents over time, and I can give them next best action, and I can integrate AI, ML, and I can integrate Customer 360. So we were suddenly into a different set of conversations where we had a much more feature-rich roadmap that we could then leverage to innovate on behalf of our colleagues and our customers. And this was just the first stage. So it ticked a number of different boxes, but that ability to bring it into action very, very quickly, know it was going to work, know it was going to scale, and know it was going to be there for the next 10, 15, 20 years with all of the capabilities that we had, was a really unique opportunity for us.
So some of the benefits that you've realized through this, maybe you can talk us through a little bit of that, what you've seen with the platform.
Yeah, so we were able to stand the platform up from nothing to into pilot with 100 agents, and these agents taking real calls from real customers in just 5 months, which, compared with the normal timelines it would take us to do this historically, is transformational. We were able to do that with a very small team. So actually the teams who implemented it was only 2 squads of 10, one on Amazon, one on Salesforce. So just 20 people to stand up something of this nature. Again, previously you would have probably used 10 times that and taken an awful lot longer. So in terms of those core metrics of shrinking time, shrinking the amount of work you have to do, therefore cost, risk, and timelines, absolutely fantastic for us. But it also then gave us this great experience, because actually all the feedback that we've had from our agents and actually from our customers is that they really like it. And that's really important, because when we come to do the rollout, people are actually asking us for this. They want the platform now, which means we've got everybody's commitment of time to migrate, which is phenomenal. That's often one of the hardest battles to win inside any enterprise, is you put a new piece of technology out and people look a bit underwhelmed by it, or they're not really that enthusiastic, therefore they don't get behind it. We don't have that problem. They really like it. We've seen the agents embrace it. They love some of the features. They love some of the new capabilities that we brought in. And also we've then got all the real-time reporting in terms of that agent set of performances, which we've never had before. So on all sort of levels, it's really been a success to date. And it's really sort of, for us, validated the approach. And it's also then allowed us to start to introduce some of the features that we'll talk about in a little bit.
So, Graham, you're painting a picture of a lot of rainbows and unicorns here. This sounds like a great thing. Surely some things went wrong. What would you have done differently if you could?
Yeah, I don't think we wouldn't have approached the problem any differently at all. I mean, I think everybody who's been involved in it ultimately is very, very happy with it. But there was a couple of key areas that I would highlight. Number one, when you can roll out the technology this quick, suddenly your long pole in the tent for your planning purposes moves. Traditionally it's been waiting for the technology teams to get the platform stood up, get it ready. And therefore, you've got a long run-in as a business change team and as a business before you have to get into doing the change. And also you can affect the change faster. You can roll out quicker. You know it's going to scale. You know it's going to work. So what that then does is put a lot of pressure on your business change planning. And we were probably a little bit sort of slow on that at first and actually had to play catch up. Now the good news is we played the catch up, but it put quite a lot of strain on the team. So there's a lesson there in terms of understanding the change in the dynamics about where the long timeline events are and making sure that you plan accordingly. The second thing I'd call out is that when you're dealing with two very rich ecosystems like Salesforce and Amazon, occasionally you're going to get an overlap. And occasionally you're going to get something where you think, I'm not sure how we solve this, and neither Salesforce or Amazon have encountered that problem before as well. So a good example of that was chat. So it took us quite a while to figure out, we have chat on the Connect, we have chat on Salesforce, so which chat do you use? How do you integrate that? And it wasn't a problem that Salesforce and Amazon had to deal with before either. So we worked with both companies in partnership to figure out a way to do that. So I guess what I would call out is just have a think about when you're sort of implementing your basic platform. Also take a look at your roadmap, because some of those questions you may have to answer quite quickly or early on. So just take some time to think about where you're trying to go over the longer period. And again, we were able to solve that, and we came up with some really, really good solutions on it. But it was one of those things, probably a reflection of the fact that we're still relatively early in this journey in terms of these integrated partnerships.
There's some very valid points there that as an architect, I get geeked out on the technology, but there's also the process and the people elements of this that we need to keep in mind as we move forward as well.
Yeah, and that's really critical, because at the end of the day, you don't just want to replace the technology. That's all very nice for the technology people, and it deals with certain aspects. It gets you into a more modern platform. It's great for the teams, and it means we've got something we can run on for the next 10, 20 years. But ultimately, in order to get the value out of it, you really need the platform to be a catalyst for changing the way that you work as an internal team, or for changing the way that you engage with your customers. And that's where the real value comes. And that's where the real transformation comes. If you just do the technology, you've got an upgrade. If you change the way that you work, the way that you engage with the customers, you're starting to get transformation. So using the platforms out of the box is actually quite an important principle, because what it does is it forces you as a business to rethink the way you do things. Often without being conscious of it, when you go and ask users the requirements for a new platform, they'll write down the requirements. But when you stand back and look at them, you realize that what you're actually being told is, I want it to work the same way as the old one. Okay, right, well that's good, but it's not going to help us when it comes to transformation. So it's very important that you use the capabilities natively and you actually stick to that principle, because what it does is it keeps you honest. It keeps you thinking about doing things in a different way, even though that might be a little bit awkward and a bit uncomfortable sometimes, because you're into a bit of uncharted territory. So really giving thought to how you use the platform in its broadest sense to drive a broader set of changes in terms of process, the way that you engage with customers, the way that you operate internally is critical to success, because that's where you get the full benefit of the whole ecosystem.
It occurs to me in our conversation here that some people here may not necessarily be aware of what we are doing with Service Cloud Voice and Amazon Connect. This is, I think, one of the great examples of where we've really put together a seamless integration between products from the two organizations. So you're probably aware Amazon Connect has been transforming the way people stand up telephony systems from in the cloud. So reducing the time to deploy, for example, from months or even years down to just simply days or weeks. So Amazon Connect, obviously very powerful. What we've done is taken with Service Cloud Voice, bringing that conversational channel into Salesforce as a native channel. So combine that with digital channels like email, SMS, text, chats. Combine all that into one platform along with the Customer 360 that gives you the context to deal with those customers and understand what their buying habits are, what their challenges are, and what your history with that customer has been. On top of that, we can leverage all of those extra things that come along with Amazon Connect for the voice channel. Things like automated transcription of the conversations, looking at sentiment analysis across those. Those are great things that we can then feed into our next best action engine. So think about this: if you've got a conversation that's going on with the customer, the agent is getting prompted for, maybe this customer seems frustrated, we should escalate this or engage a supervisor, or maybe we should suggest another option for them that would be more applicable to their needs, just based on that conversation. So that's what Service Cloud Voice and Amazon Connect are all about.
Yeah, and just picking up on a couple of those points, when you put Salesforce in front of your colleagues, you're giving them a completely different experience. The reality today is that our colleagues in the contact centers and branch do an amazing job of working around our technology quite often. It's still very siloed, it's disconnected, it's not that single pane of glass. So one of the things we wanted to do with this was to make sure we really laid the foundations to solve that problem in the long term, to make the job easier, but also then to start to surface all those rich contextual insights that would help the agent just do a better job, just take the friction out, make it easier. So we want the machines to be helping the people, not hindering them. And we didn't want the agents to feel like they were the people who had to do all the integration, who had to be that omni-channel integration layer. So the Salesforce piece plays a really central role. As you say, the Amazon Connect piece, it just gives you that robustness and that scalability and that rich set of capabilities for handling the contacts and all of those integrations. But in order to make it relevant and actionable for the agent, that's where the Salesforce piece comes in, and that's where you really start to see the value. And it really is a classic sort of 1 + 1 makes 4, because you get so much extra stuff out of it in terms of what we're doing. You just mentioned transcription. So one of the pieces of feedback we've had from our colleagues in the contact centers is they really love the transcription, because it actually allows them to see and pick up all of these cues from the customers that helps them better answer their query, better serve them, but also makes it easier for them to do the job. It's a difficult job sometimes, often dealing with difficult inquiries. And sentiment analysis, again, when you start bringing sentiment analysis, you start to pick out keywords. Is someone in distress? Okay, we'll route them straight through. Just get them into the right queue really, really quickly, get them in front of someone who can help them. So there's an enormous set of capabilities that come with this, which are really good.
It was great to hear all the success you've had around Service Cloud Voice and Amazon Connect. My next question would be, what's next? Where do you go from here?
Great question. So first and foremost, we haven't finished the job with the contact center. We are just about to exit pilot. We exit that next week, I think, after 3 months of successful trial. That will then lay the ground for us to start mass migration in the first half of next year. We have 13,000 colleagues that we need to move. Affects almost every function within the bank. So it's a huge piece of work, so we need to be focused on that. So that's job one, and that really establishes that base capability and that foundational layer in the hands of all of our colleagues who are customer-facing, deal with customers, etc., or have to support customers and colleagues. Stage two, and this is actually something that's already underway, is to make sure that we deal with the data piece. So we want to hydrate Salesforce with the core set of data that allows it to then bring in its extra set of capabilities. We can start to use that for more insights-driven interactions. And then we want to pair it with two really critical capabilities. One is the fast and shallow, as we call it, which is all of your event streaming, where you get to know a little bit about the customer, but at high speed, very much almost sort of near real time. But you want to pair that with the deep and slow, as we call it, which is where you start to do all your long-term curation of what you know about the customer, how you structure that data, and all of the other metadata that you can put on top of it, like propensity, credit decisions, risk factors, etc., that then allow those things to come together and support the colleague and the customer, because we don't just surface these capabilities into our contact centers and branch, they also get surfaced into our online offerings. And it's where those two things meet, where the data comes in and brings to life these platforms. They're incredibly powerful platforms, but ultimately they actually don't do a huge amount of stuff unless you really get the data piece sorted. And I often sit through conversations about it's one or it's the other. Actually, it's both. You really need both, and you bring them together. And again, we get that from the ecosystem.
I want to circle back to something you said early on in your introduction, and that was security. It's non-negotiable, obviously, in the bank. And so one of the areas that I wanted to highlight that I think maybe is of interest here, as we've spoken before, is Salesforce Private Connect. So if you're not aware of this, this is to me one of the great examples of where we're putting products together that really fulfill this vision. Trust is Salesforce's #1 value. And I think I can safely say that's true of AWS as well. I mean, neither one of us have a business model if our customers don't trust us. So with Salesforce Private Connect, what we've done is we've enabled a secure private connection bidirectionally between Salesforce data centers and AWS data centers. So what that means is our customers' sensitive data never hits the public internet. So it gives us that secure pipeline between our two environments to make sure that we are rock solid on security. So is that part of the plan as going forward as well?
Yeah, this is a really good example of hidden innovation and hidden value, effectively. So as a bank, as we talked about earlier on, there are two non-negotiables: operational resilience, it has to be there, and it has to stand up, and it needs to be secure. But ultimately, the customer doesn't really perceive that. They don't choose their bank because of that. They just expect it to be there, and rightly so. So it's one of those interesting things where it's an essential need, but it's not effectively considered to be value enhancing or value creation sort of type activity. And this is a really good example where we're able to integrate these two clouds directly. Now, there are other ways to do that. We could always do this ourselves. We could take AWS, we could take Salesforce, we could pull them back into our own infrastructure. We could make that connection. We could do all of that plumbing. But we don't need to. As long as this works and as long as it's robust and secure and it passes all of our kind of criteria, we no longer need to do that. We can just trust it to work, and then we can move on to the next thing. And that's really important because that solves for one of the two big concerns that we'll always have. And again, we saw this with the cloud with the pandemic. Up to the pandemic, there was always a question about, will the cloud stand up when put to a huge test like that? And the answer was yes. Actually, it became an essential part of the response of virtually every company on the planet. They had some form of public cloud capability they needed to use and rely upon in order to respond to the pandemic. We were the same. So we know it can stand up. We know it's got that resilience. And now with all these innovations, we're now starting to bring all that really, really good integrated security, but without necessarily us as the bank having the burden of having to develop and implement and manage all of that ourselves.
Great. So that security layer is the underpinning. But I want to also go back to a couple of things that you mentioned up front, and then you reiterated in your roadmap, is the changing customer. So we're seeing how the consumer, in your case, the banking customer, they change the way they're engaging, their preferences, the speed of everything. And so underpinning all of this is the need to really understand and be able to track and put together a profile around that customer, which is what Salesforce CDP is all about, Customer Data Platform. And this is our enterprise-wide solution to that problem. It enables marketers to collect information about their customers and consumers, to unify that information coming from multiple sources, to segment it out and to engage customers the way that they need to be engaged on every touch point. And we realize that a lot of our customers, Santander being no exception here, have data in a lot of different places, not just in the Salesforce platform, and in particular AWS data stores and data lakes. So that's why the CDP also manages egress and ingress of data within the platform. And that's a key thing for AWS because we're working through S3 buckets in essence to be able to get that data into the platform and then get it out so we can make decisions and do things with it on the AWS side. So I would imagine that this is also part of that vision, that roadmap.
Yeah, very much so. And you touched on it's useful for marketeers, but actually in the context of servicing, it's every bit as important because the more you know about the customer, the more you understand about their needs, the better able you are to service it, and the faster you're able to do that. You're able to sort their problem figure out what needs to be done, and get the right result for the customer, but also at a cost point that works for the company. The quicker you can manage those transactions, the better. So the CDP becomes really critical to that, because what you really want to do is sort of form that sort of rich set of data about everything you know about the customer, have it nicely curated, but also have it, most importantly, have it actionable. You know, it's all very well to have it, but if you can't use it and you can't get it into the hands of your users, whether that be your colleagues who are servicing the customer or the customer trying to service themselves, it's of limited value. So again, having all of that work done for you, that basically means that you can then focus on the task of exploitation of that data and getting value out of it without having to worry about all the basic plumbing of moving it around, getting it into one place, curating it in a way that's then consumable, and then making it consumable is of huge value to us.
You mentioned exploiting and consuming that data, which kind of brings me to another point that I wanted to discuss. We talked a lot about pieces and parts and components here in the last few minutes. But getting back to some of the direct integrations or the direct work that we've done between Salesforce, AWS, and Santander, we've talked about decisioning. So, for example, credit scoring. You know, that's a complex process often to understand. Is this loan application good business for the consumer? Is it a good business for the bank? Fraud detection, doing things that prevent the bad guys from doing things without making it an arduous process for the good guys. Personalizations can be very complex and data intensive. What we found is AWS has some great solutions for this. And we've looked at things like that AWS calls jump starts. Jump starts are SageMaker models that are meant to prove out concepts that enable you to get started faster with some of these concepts. And one of the things that we worked with the bank on is this idea of credit scoring and bringing that to life through an integration with Salesforce and SageMaker. So I'm going to hop right into this as kind of an overview architecture of what the solution looks like. We start in Salesforce. Credit applications come into Salesforce. This is our customer data platform. This is where that data gets captured. Now, where does that come from? It may come from someone on the phone talking to an agent, and they're working through a credit application. It could even come through a portal, a customer-based portal, where the customer is entering information in. The great thing about this working through Salesforce is it's in the Customer 360. This is where we've captured what we know about that customer. So think about a situation where we've got an existing customer that is applying for a loan. We don't have to re-ask them all the questions we already know. We already know what accounts they have and their balances within our bank. We know potentially how long they've been in this address, whether they own or rent. We can feed all of that information into that decision model that's hosted in AWS SageMaker. The response or the answer, the prediction comes back into Salesforce, and we can put that right on the pane of glass for that agent. So that agent, while he or she is on the phone with the customer, has an idea already of where this loan process is headed and can help coach the customer. In fact, we can feed that into our next best action engine, which means that agent, again, has prompts giving them advice on how to help the customer be more successful. And it's right there in the moment. We're not back and forth with phone calls or emails. We could also feed that into the CDP. So the more we know about our customer, the better we can service their needs. What if this loan application, for example, was a home equity loan to build out a nursery? What a better time to engage that customer on a college savings plan journey than now. Better than that, we can take all that information then that we've learned over time, we can feed it back into the credit decisioning model to make that model smarter and make better decisions as we go forward. And you see a number of icons here at the bottom. These are other services that can be brought to bear from Salesforce, from AWS as well, to enrich that data as we go as well.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting slide because actually it very neatly encapsulates a lot of what we talk about. This is a very, very complex piece a process piece. This is something that we as banks do every day. It's basically the job we're in. We're credit risk scoring. We're always making decisions about, loan parameters, et cetera, for customers. And it requires a lot of technology and a lot of capabilities to do it. But if you look at this, all of those capabilities are encapsulated in just 2 platforms, and almost all of those are pre-integrated. So that process has just got a lot simpler for us in terms of building the plumbing, and this is a really good example of that capability. And it's also got much wider utility, because actually most of the transactions that we're doing have got some sort of risk weighting on them. And when you think about fraud, for example, you then got to think about, well, is this the real person trying to do this transaction, or is this a bad actor who's trying to spoof someone's credentials and make it look like they're the person? Those decisions have to be made very quickly, and actually often the only way you can deal with it is to put friction in the system. So you degrade the experience for the legitimate customer, but you also degrade the experience, you also sort of reduce the opportunity for the bad actors to be successful. So really what we want to do is take all this type of data and all of that information, remove the friction for the legitimate customer, but then massively increase the friction to the point of not being able to achieve it for the bad actors. And data and the rich flow of data and all of those decisions that we can bring to bear help all of the parties involved, whether that be the customer make a decision or the agent who's trying to transact with them, push the payment through, or do anything in the branch. So the data is key.
So back in September, we introduced Salesforce Genie at our users conference, Dreamforce in San Francisco. So this is something that we've talked about that I think is of very paramount interest to Santander and many of our customers. Genie is an automated, intelligent, real-time platform for harmonizing customer data, simply put. Now, there are a few key aspects of this platform. Open data access, bringing your own AI, much like what we've already talked about with SageMaker, but making that even easier and pre-building those integration. And first-party advertising. So one of the key things here, I think, that we've talked about is through the open data access, bring your own AI, we're talking about a zero-copy model here. So we're not duplicating data between Salesforce and AWS. Why is that important to the bank?
Yeah, it's hugely important. Again, it's another one of those sort of hidden valuable innovations. As a CIO of a bank, you worry about 2 things. They keep you awake at night. Is the platform running? And is it secure? Where's my data? Where is my data? I don't lose my infrastructure very often. I kind of know where that is, but what I'm really worried about is where the data is. And the more you copy that and the more you distribute it, the bigger that issue becomes. You don't want to have it spread over too many platforms, too many instances, etc. So it's very important to us to try and keep that data proliferation as compact as we can. That reduces the attack surface and therefore makes it easier for us to secure better results for us. The zero copy thing is really essential to that because it allows us to do that, to make all this rich data available, but without proliferation or over proliferation. And it's just a really neat way of solving it. And we are actually working, my data colleagues are working on the Snowflake implementation. That's part of our roadmap. And that's really part of our broader strategy around leveraging the value of the platform. So, take cloud as a base enabler to then add feature-rich platforms like Salesforce and AWS into the mix to make those to use those platforms in a pre-integrated way and to use them out of the box. And it's all of those compounding factors that allow us to solve for all of those contradictory requirements that we talked about at the beginning in terms of make it resilient, make it secure, make it fast, make it cost-effective, be everywhere, allow us to innovate. We get all of this by applying those principles across these key platforms.
Well, great. I wanted to kind of bring it on home here. So, I think we're just starting on this journey. I've had the pleasure to work with my colleagues at AWS with other industries and groups, and I think that there's no shortage of ideas on what we can do. But I think you'll see us still drive new ways that we can help transform companies. as well as ways we can harmonize the platforms to take a lot of the friction out and make it easy, but still give you the ability to go and do your own thing, right? Drive what's going to differentiate your business in whole new ways that you can innovate. Well, Graham, I want to thank you for participating in all the work and effort that you've put into the Salesforce and AWS. We're here to help support you through the rollout and the rest of the transformation. It's going to be an exciting ride. For anybody who's interested in learning more, we are hosting the Content Hub, as you can see in the Venetian Hall B, C, and D. Look for Dennis or myself. There's about 6 of us from my team that are there and would love to understand what challenges you're trying to address and see if we can't help you too. All right, well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.